you mentioned this in this paper, but there's even a Dutch convert. There's a Bosnian Muslim. There's a Latino Muslim. And so I'm just curious, what is the show, given all of its sort of stereotypical reproductions of stereotypes, is it doing something interesting with race? Is it decoupling Islam from particular racializations? So just in general, I'm curious what the show is doing with race. And finally, I was really interested in, as somebody who studies in part Latin American, or immigration from Latin America to the United States, I was struck by the fact that Sleep herself has a Latino character based on Padilla. And I was just wondering, what could be said about that? It made me really start to think about what scholars and activists are beginning to call the military immigration complex. And of course, the military immigration complex affects all sorts of immigrants, but still largely, in many ways, affects immigrants from Latin America. So about a year ago, there was at the time the largest single-site U.S. immigration raid in the United States in a small town meatpacking plant in Iowa. I say it used to be the largest because we recently had the new largest. I think it was in Pennsylvania. So, within like 3 years, we've had the two largest of these sorts of raids. Large numbers of Latin American workers were rounded up. They were held in captivity in the cattle holding pens of the local fairgrounds. They were eventually chained at the waist and at the ankles. No yellow jumpsuits, but you know where I'm going, and they were sort of marched into court, makeshift courts for their immigration hearings. I think around 300 of them or so were deported, not deported, first punished. So now what happens before someone is deported, one is punished for being in the country illegally, so they serve several months in jail, and then will be deported. So it's not Gitmo yet. But there do seem to be, possible points of convergence. We really are, in terms of immigration, moving in a kind of Guantanamo direction. And I'm curious if the show, or in your analysis of the show, if there are potential interfaces. Finally, unfortunately, Rudy Busto, as I noted, could not be here, and I really can't, do justice to it. In keeping with such a complex show like Heroes, his paper is quite complex and really fascinating. And I can't do all of the details, but let me just sort of briefly summarize what I take to be the thesis of the paper, and I think it's quite an interesting thesis. One of the things that Busto argues is that the world of Heroes represents an apocalypse, but it comes from the perspective of a secular apocalypse. And part of what he means by that is it's like a natural or human-made disaster. And from the perspective of a sort of secular apocalypse, he wants to argue what that means is if there is no sort of transcendental agent either causing the problem or that can be appealed to address the problem, then it becomes the responsibility of human agency, albeit superhuman agency in the form of the heroes. So he's really reading, I think, as he concludes, he's reading Heroes as a particular expression of U.S. Civil religion, in which the values that are valorized or made heroic aren't transcendental religious values, but values of responsibility, of hard work, of individual human effort, as I said, albeit superhuman effort. Part of this whole sort of mixed bag of civil humanism are the kinds of values that I just mentioned, mixed with a kind of mishmash of New Age Orientalism, which sort of edges towards the spiritual and the religious, but never enters fully into it. And again, here I see a sort of contradiction that perhaps we can talk about in Professor Busto's absence. One of the things that is interesting, his notion of a secular apocalypse, for me, immediately resonated with Walter Benjamin's figure of the last angel of history. So when Walter Benjamin is explaining his perspective on history, he adopts a radically anti-progressive model of history. Whereas from the perspective of progressive history with its linear timelines, history looks like the march of progress. From the perspective of the last angel of history, his figure for the kind of history he's interested in, instead of being faced forward, the vantage point of this history is looking backward. And from that perspective, history looks like the piling up of ruin after ruin after ruin. In other words, it starts to look like a secular apocalypse as described by Rudy Busto. And in Benjamin's account, this model of thinking of history, that he calls historical materialism, is dramatically opposed to all sorts of progressive narratives, whether they be Christian teleological progressive narratives or Enlightenment views about the inherently improving and progressive nature of human history. So it's opposed to both religious and secular models of progress. And in Busto's account, one of the things that is fascinating, I think, is that you have this kind of contradiction he sees in Heroes, where on the one hand you have the secular apocalypse, which in his account deranges the linear time of the Christian apocalypse. At the same time as the show is, in his account, deeply invested in modes of progress, which, while they are not expressly Christian or religious modes of progress, at some level start to blur that line in a way that would make you want to push on the notion of the secular. In other words, one of the things he notes is that the show has a remarkable amount of faith in the ability of Japanese or other immigrants to in some way assimilate or be incorporated with the United States, and an incredible faith in the power of science and technology to help humans solve those problems. Not expressly religious, but still this incredible investment in progress that in some way is at right angles to the emphasis on a secular apocalypse that supposedly deranges all notions of progress. So I would be curious to know from Professor Busto how, or from anyone who has any ideas, how those two things get reconciled, or if they do at all. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Do either of you want to respond to any of Curtis's points, or should we open up the floor for questions for the time we have left?
I just wanted to thank Curtis for that. I mean, one of the real privileges of this conference has been respondents who have actually taken seriously their task. So thank you so much for that. I think just very quickly, that first part, the authentic stuff, that's what almost bothered me as a viewer. It's like you get these things right, so it's almost like you should know better, and so when you get those things wrong, it becomes all that more frustrating. The race issues is a great one, and I think that is one of the great strengths of the show, to say that Muslims aren't all the same. Here's this Dutch woman who's a Muslim, here's this Latino who's a Muslim, here's this Bosnian who's a Muslim, South American who's a Muslim. So I think in that sense it works well.
I wanted to thank you too as well, Curtis. Thank you so much. I just want to respond to one of the things you say, what was it? Maybe there was something about me that allowed me to focus in on Rebecca's gaze so intently. And I think there may be something true to that. There were two, I could call them very special fans, because they were responsible for reviewing the series for TV with LP and another place. Their reviews were actually quite intimidating because they were so detailed and passionate, and they're also erudite in this kind of film criticism kind of way. And I looked at the way that they analyzed that scene where Kevin comes back and kind of checks Andy and Rebecca, Pancho was this, and they were both really pleased with him. Yeah, way to tell them. And I think that there was a difference in the way that I appreciated her gaze and saw where her eyes were located. That not only, I think, comes from a kind of linguistic anthropological focus where you look at gaze and silence and stuff, but also looking at all positionality. And I think it also got me thinking a lot about, when I looked at the fan reviews, there were critiques about disability. Kevin should have had armrests, for the first half of the first season. How did he not have armrests? But not a lot of critiques around race. So I wonder too about what people were taking from the show and in regards to race and whiteness in particular. It was certainly a diverse representation of the Hamas, but
hear a